we have to talk about the toll, on the psychology of the people, they attack. Always feeling threatened, not being able, to plan your life because you never know what's going to happen.
But she said that just crossing certain countries in Africa already made them so much more vulnerable to violence.
I remember when I was in primary school, our teacher was explaining to us, we're going to be united, we're going to have the African Union. And I was, as a kid, yes. And I grew up and I'm like, are they doing anything to prevent these conflicts?
In my country, being a woman itself is a crime.
In my country, it is illegal for a woman's voice to be heard in the street.
In my country, my creative freedom can cost me my blood.
I have a refugee protection, but I'm invisible.
I have a refugee protection, but freedom is not free. You have to buy it.
I don't even have a country. Try being an activist when you're stateless.
I have refugee status, but without NGOs like Refugee, I wouldn't have any support.
I am a recognized refugee in Europe, but I'm still being stopped at airports for holding a refugee travel document.
In Refugee, I can be myself, an artist, in a safe place.
In Refocus, I can be brave in my art and reconnect with activism.
In Refocus, I can create media and teach others.
I stayed here because of Refocus. I bet on Refocus because there is no creative borders here.
Our community wants to say thank you to everyone who has been so generous with their support. But we still need your help to ensure our community continues. You can help change someone's life just like ours by donating today. Hello everyone, this is Fractured Podcast. I hope this episode finds you well. Today's guest connected with us from the Democratic Republic of Congo, journalist Lalla SY. We are happy to have you with us.
Thank you for having me, Rashid.
Lalla SY writes and reports about issues in Africa, and I think we never had an episode about Africa. No, we had before.
We
Kenya.
had some.
Yeah.
Yes.
We had. Sorry.
We had something about Sudan.
Sudan,
yeah, we
yes.
did. It's
cool.
But still, Lalla, I think you will educate us a lot today. Seriously, because when we were doing research for this podcast, we just didn't even know where to start. I was texting Rashid like how
so many countries.
We need to narrow it down, and because it's gigantic. The topic we want to talk about. Many countries in Africa, countries who are at the same time countries of origin of refugees, but also hosting countries. And here in Europe, we are used to this very simple division. Either you're a country that sends refugees, so you're the country of origin, or you're hosting, you're getting people there, or maybe you're a transit country, right? Also, almost the whole Balkans here. But in Africa, that's not always the case. There are so many countries, and I have basically 3 pages of my research on which countries are at the same time countries of origin and hosting countries. And I'm not going to name it, but Chad, Sudan, South Sudan, Ethiopia, Central African Republic, Nigeria. Basically, there are so many of them, and you reported on this situation of refugees in those countries and also of those factors that are forcing people to leave or to come back. So we wanted to maybe start, not maybe by the simplest question of what is going on, but how does this fact that some countries really at the same time have refugees inside and send people from those countries are forced to leave, how do those factors shape this political and social scene of those countries? How does it look like?
Well, as you said, one country can be a host for refugees and can also produce refugees because of political instability, conflicts, but also because of economic resources that are not really available or in enough quantity for young people. So in terms of political instability, this is unfortunately something that is going on in sub-Saharan Africa. For the countries I've been covering over the years, I can mention the Sahel with the countries like Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger. These three countries alone have been going through coups d'etats lately, coups d'etats that have also roots in the fact that the leaders of those countries were accused of not being able to fight against so-called terrorism or armed groups, non-state armed groups. So this violence can produce refugees. For example, there's an area called the Tree Border Area in West Africa between Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso, which can be seen like a no man's land where a lot of armed groups, operate. These armed groups can perpetrate attacks on villagers. Those villages find themselves forced to flee. So they'll be going to a neighboring country. So you will see people from Burkina Faso leaving their villages and find themselves in Côte d'Ivoire or even in Mali or Niger even. So I think, I would summarize it in the fact that it's a very unstable region, the sub-Saharan African region. And that's why then you have this movements, that bring people and make people go away also. That would be the explanation for me so far.
Lalla, there are so many reasons why these things are happening, these conflicts happening in African countries, and I think we cannot rule out the external influence. And I remember I was in college and I had some students, they're from Mali, and they were telling me every time we do something good in Mali and we have a good government, France said something and changed and they put their own man. And also I experience it because I'm originally from Western Sahara. Every time there is a negotiation to do something, either France blocks it or Spain. And I was just listening to this guy, he was an ex-Marine, and he said he went to work later when he finished his service. He went to work with the France Foreign Legion. And he said that they were deployed in many countries, and he said he met many Russian forces, many Chinese forces. So I would like to ask you, how is this external influence affecting African countries and creating this conflict in many countries?
African perceive the current conflicts they are going through, for some I would say, as consequences of colonialism. Many of these countries have been independent since the 60s, but have always been sort of still, under the umbrella, I would say, of the ex-colonial power. That would be France, could be Spain, as you mentioned, but mainly France in Western Central Africa, or Belgium to some extent. So these conflicts, result from that. Those countries have had leaders who used to obey to France, who used to govern their countries as France wanted, and also be chosen or thrown away, also thrown out by when France or what is perceived as the ex-colonial power wanted. So it's the case, it has been the case in Mali to a certain extent. The country had been, independent since the 60s. Then, like other countries, those countries had founding fathers. There was a sort of a movement, to free those countries from imperialism. But then there was a whole generation of leaders that were then either killed or just victims of putsches, and then other leaders came, but things didn't change, But what I would say is that most recently, I would say that for the past decade now or more, there's a younger generation that wants change and that wants leaders they can identify to, leaders they feel can, step up and, be more assertive, opposite, let's say, assertive towards their what is perceived as their former colonial power. You might have heard that now Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger have thrown out France in the sense of, they had some sort of military presence in those countries, and after coups, coup after coups, the military got rid of the civilian power that was there, and they've thrown out France to bring in, I would say, partners or other allies that they perceived treated them better or treated them a little bit more than just, countries that could be used or that were only relevant because they had resources.
Mm-hmm. I remember in this context listening to BBC Africa with you, actually, when you were reporting about this issue, how Mali was supposed to, was trying to throw out of the country the French troops. And it was a very interesting thing for me. So I wonder if you can share a bit more about this. Why were people so in the first place, why did they want the troops to be in the country, and then why did they really stop appreciating their presence there?
Well, many would say Mali was the one that asked for a French presence in the country, because at the time the country was under attack, and also almost half of the country was not under the control of the government anymore. And there was those jihadist groups, that were threatening the population, and they were just coming further down in the country. You have to see Mali as very populated in the south, and then the north is the desert, the Sahara, which is less populated. And so those attacks were just coming closer and closer, and they were being very regular now. So the population just got fed up and had the feeling that their rulers weren't really, guaranteeing their security. They also felt like they were using their resources just to live a good life when there was poverty, there was unemployment. So at some point, the youth just got out, protested more and more, and then France intervened in the form of a military force that was supposed somehow to push away those terrorists. But then what was supposed to be a punctual operation just, started becoming permanent. And there was a growing anti-French sentiment within the population. People felt like the French were here, but there was the attacks weren't getting less brutal or less recurrent, So at this point, there was more and more again protests, to the point that the Malian president at that time, Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta, was ousted, and a group of military colonels, I think they were at the time, took over the country, and they have been governing the country ever since.
Mm-hmm. In this context also, can I ask you about the activity of Boko Haram and how is this impacting people and the fact that they need to flee?
The activity of Boko Haram would be further and can be felt in Nigeria, Niger, and also part of Chad in the Lake Chad region. So it's the same mode of operating, attacks. I think you've heard of the abductions also. Yeah. You've heard of the Chibok girls, hundreds that were abducted.
Schoolgirls, yeah.
And there was not much to do, there wasn't a strong riposte or a strong intervention from the army to bring back those girls, if I could put it that way. So yes, Boko Haram, we hear of them less and less, but then what's dangerous about them is that they form alliances then with other greater groups that are, of an international envergure, I would say in French. I don't know if the word is correct in English. And then it just fragilizes a country to have terrorists. It fragilizes a country, it makes people flee, it makes investors go away. So I think, that's what's really the impact. And also we have to talk about the toll, on the psychology of the people, they attack. Always feeling threatened, not being able, to plan your life because you never know what's going to happen. You can't travel, and every movement actually puts you in danger because you never know where they hit.
Maybe some people don't know, but in Africa we have the African Union, like the European Union. In my opinion, it's just a name. And I remember when I was in primary school, our teacher was explaining to us, we're going to be united, we're going to have the African Union. And I was, as a kid, yes. And I grew up and I'm like, are they doing anything to prevent these conflicts? And maybe Lalla has a different opinion. Maybe they're doing something that I don't know to solve these conflicts. So can you tell us about the role of African Union in stopping these civil wars?
I think whether it is the African Union or the ECOWAS or other regional bodies, they are important in the prevention of conflicts because they're still forums where African leaders can meet and talk about the situation of their countries. They might not always be as efficient as one would hope, but it's difficult, to ask to a country to give part of its sovereignty, to accept laws, rules, agreements that are, put above their national jurisdic instruments. So I would say there are still organizations that maybe have to find another way, to include their member states and to make their member states trust them enough, to accept their decisions and to make their decisions respected. It's difficult more and more now because for an organization like ECOWAS, it hasn't been seen before. They used to have strong instruments. For example, when they used to have a coup d'etat, you would get suspended from that organization. Your borders would be closed, you could have an economic embargo. And then it was tools to put pressure on a country. But when you see that this kind of organization now, countries can pull out from those organizations and fragilize them. You have to understand that they need to redefine their role in Africa and how they can intervene in every country where there's a conflict.
I would like to change the subject a little bit and to go back to the refugees and or internally displaced people, because the fact that if there are refugees and internally displaced people, it's obvious that the resources are always scarce. They have to be redistributed. Could you tell us a little bit more of how it looks like? What's the toll on those countries that host refugees in Africa, and what is the humanitarian situation there?
I'll speak about Chad, which is the most recent country I covered. It's a huge country that is very difficult to manage in itself. It might be rich in resources, but then people are still poor. So these are populations, I think, that are on the bottom, of the rank when we talk about wealth. So in the eastern part of Chad, where I was at the border with Sudan, you will find communities, that really have very little to live with. So some are farmers, others will do trade, but also you have to imagine a very hostile environment there. There's very little, the land is very arid, so it's difficult to farm there. Water is very scarce. At some point during the year, there's no rain, so people have to dig, the ground to get water, like at a distance to up to 1 meter or 2 meters to have water. So then refugees come on top of that, At first, I have to say I have seen communities who are very generous, really very hospitable. So for those who cross on the very first day, many refugees have told me that when they fled from Sudan, the very first people, even before the humanitarian agents, that the people that helped them were local people, meaning Chadians, giving them at least water to drink. Some had not drunk clean water for days, or a little bread, whatever they have, they will share. But then the longer the refugees stay, the more tension arises, because they have to share water points. They also have to share firewood, which is very scarce, and even the basic services, like hospitals, schools, that were, intended for a few people. Now they have to share with hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of people. So it's very difficult. At some point, you will even have conflict between host communities and refugees. There's also a sentiment of, not being considered, because when refugees arrive, NGOs arrive, humanitarian aid arrives, and then sometimes it's only given to refugees. So you'll have the local community that feels that, they also need that food, they also need that oil, they also need soap, So there can be some misunderstanding at sometimes, and sometimes it needs, even, military intervention to avoid clashes or, rising tension.
So if I can have a follow-up question, so what are the conditions for refugees? And now I know it's a big question because we're discussing so many countries at the same time, but maybe staying with Chad right now, where are people located? What kind of living conditions, living standards do they have once they are admitted?
So people fleeing Sudan will come through border towns. So they'll come through, right now, I think the main entry point would be Adre. And from Adre, actually, there's just a bridge and you can see Sudan on the other side. So you'll see people crossing the border, on the back of donkeys, by foot. When they have a little bit, more money, it will be by motorbike, or they will pay people, to drive them until the border, and they will cross. So you can see families, quite big families. When I was there, it was mainly women and children, though, not many men. So they arrive and they are almost empty-handed. Sometimes they will tell you that their houses have been burned down, their businesses have been looted, and on the way, especially women, they experience all sorts of violence, up to sexual violence. So there will be beatings. After surviving all of that, they arrive in a state of extreme fatigue, and also they're very, they're just traumatized from what they've been through, So some they don't even need to tell you their stories. You can see on their face that they've been beaten up. Some women have been raped. Children can be shot at. Others will see things they can't even talk about, I can remember a lady just telling me that she had fled after seeing her husband being shot, and 5 of his brothers also. And some didn't die right away. Some died a few days later, and then, she had to flee. I think she had a gold ring that she sold. And even on the way, you get stopped, every kilometer or so, and you have to still bribe people to be able to get to the border and cross and get to Chad.
Crossing is to any border is so traumatizing for women. We met many, but a friend of mine who worked in house for women in Switzerland, women could stay there for any reasons, not necessarily because they were victims of gender-based violence, but she said that just crossing certain countries in Africa already made them so much more vulnerable to violence, and said that as much as they, had women from countries like Iran, Afghanistan who went through terrible violence, it was up to 90-something% of women who came from sub-Saharan Africa that were raped in their center. And this was not a center for gender-based violence. It was just women were considered simply vulnerable just because of their gender. That's why they were given this shelter. But up to 90% of women raped, and it's just I don't know if I can say it's a scary number. It's something beyond. It's mind-blowing, right? That a place can be that unsafe and unstable for women.
Yes, and I think it's very you're saying 90%. I think it's very difficult to, to even have figures, because
Of course.
a lot of women don't speak, A lot of women are too ashamed. They don't want to be stigmatized after that, You're a refugee, and then, you're a survivor of sexual violence on top of that. And then, yeah, it's very difficult for them to testify or to just, talk about what they've been through. But there's also, when they cross, when they have registered and they're given the status of refugees, NGOs, UNHCR, and other organizations organize some sort of psychosocial support, which I think helps a lot of them, just being able. I was in Chad again and Sudan, and that's what is beautiful about it. There was a lady that used to be a social worker in Sudan, so she had fled. She came in a refugee site and just, went towards the women that looked very traumatized. So she gathered them in a center where they would cook, they would write poems, they would, speak, and you could see how much, a community-based activity like this one would help them, if not to heal, would help them, get better at least, and have somewhere where they can talk about it.
Hi everyone, this is Doug from Refocus. Many of you probably know that for the past 8 years, myself and my wife Sonia have been working here in Greece, supporting refugees and asylum seekers to develop media creation skills and have a chance at pursuing careers in media. And this has been a life passion for us. But the earliest stages of this on the island of Lesbos in 2016 motivated us to do something. We thought, how could we as individuals do something to change the situation, which was young people from lots of different places in the world who did not have access to education, who were not being provided any formal opportunities for skills training. And so we created Refocus as a way to change that narrative and change that reality. And we are now here 8 years later with an international network of labs in Greece, in Poland, and in Germany. But that's not possible without really, really consistent support from individuals just like you. And so in this giving season, we're really hoping that you can find it in your bank accounts and find it in your hearts to support the expansion of our programming. The work that we do and the money that we receive, we do not receive money from governments. We receive the predominant amount of support from individuals just like yourself. And that money goes to cover the costs of our programming, the overhead of our labs, and the employment of our most seasoned media creators, those who went through our program and now are teachers. We're very different than the schools that you have back home, where you have endowments and you have an opportunity for families to support their next generation kids who are going to the same school they went to. We don't have that luxury. And so we have to do it as a community. And we are very thankful for all the support that we've received to date. And we hope that you can continue to support us into the future.
Lalla, you mentioned that there are some NGOs they are helping in these places, and I would like to ask you if you know which ones and how they are helping, and if they are allowed to go, because what we know from some places that they cannot even reach because it's dangerous. And I just want to say that from the people that I meet here in Greece, if there are no NGOs, people would not survive. And Greece is way better than situation in Africa. And we had students, actually, Refocus students, saying that if we didn't have Refocus with this training, with skills and media, they wouldn't just end up in the street, and they are teens. So, yeah, can you tell us about the NGOs in these places?
Okay. So the NGOs, there are many, because they help in different sectors. So NGOs would help like in health, in issues related to children, also sometimes education, anything, you name it, even shelter, I think NGOs do. From what I've seen with UNHCR, so they will do border monitoring, and then maybe camp management. I'm not so sure. But then it's the NGOs inside the sites, the refugee sites, that will do, that will help refugees get basic services, So access to water, like I said earlier, education, health. So you would see NGOs like Action contre la faim. This is for nutrition. You will have Save the Children, for children, obviously. You'll see Norwegian Refugee Council. I can name a lot of them. I'm not sure what are the agreements for them to get in a country. But then, there have been situations where they were prevented access to some places, maybe for political reasons. I haven't had this experience, I have to admit. Wherever I went, I found NGOs, and yes, it's incredible, because when refugees talk about the humanitarian aid they get, they will say that yes, the NGOs helped us. Because yes, that's the generic word for them to say that they have got help. They don't know who's UNHCR sometimes, or who's WHO, or who is a World Food Program. They would know. They would just say NGOs. So yeah, I think that shows the importance of those organizations, to bring assistance to people who are forced to flee.
I don't know if this is your area of expertise, but I wanted to ask you also about how those conflicts in a way generate the need for humanitarian aid, and how the humanitarian aid that is coming to different countries is actually supporting the conflicts. There's a book written years, if not decades ago. I read it in Polish, so the loose translation would be A Caravan of Humanitarian Aid. And it shows how certain conflicts can still be sustainable, can still take place, because the aid from the humanitarian convoys is taken away, or certain NGOs, in order to work, are forced to pay those local rebels or even terrorist organizations. Is this something that you're familiar with?
No, I wouldn't be able to answer this question, really. This is not, I can understand. I know where you want to go, but it hasn't been my experience, not stories I worked on. I'm sorry.
Lalla, you said there are some NGOs that are doing border monitoring. What is that?
Well, border monitoring is just being at the border, I think, counting people that come in. They will also give figures, actually, to other NGOs or international organizations to organize and coordinate the humanitarian crisis. For example, if they're at the border and on a particular day, they see that the influx is more important, this information can help an NGO and an organization bringing food to increase, the amount of food, water, or anything they bring in. So this is the border monitoring to see how many women, children get in, and stuff like that. It's more surveillance, yeah.
So do I understand well that despite the instability in the region, most of the borders stay open, and it is a very non-problematic way in this sense when it comes to like checking documents and fighting to get your way to the border, to actually go from a country to a country?
From what I've seen, most borders remain open. I think there's also an advocacy from international organizations and NGO to apply the prima facie principle, meaning that, on the appearance of a person and what they say, you believe them and you accept that they are refugees and let them in. So, and in the countries that I've been in, whether it is in Burkina Faso, Mali, Chad and Sudan, actually on the borders, it's just a difference of nationality, but you will find families, who just live one on one side and the other one on another side. So when they flee, they just come and join their families that are in another country. It's to a point that you will have, let's say, a village called, I would say, Dar es Salaam in Chad, and it will have, its perimeter goes up to Sudan. So people of Dar es Salaam are, can be from Sudan and can be from Chad, actually. So you just have families that are separated by a border, which can be even a natural border, a river, or just a bridge. So it's not that difficult to cross. It's just that the conflict makes it dangerous to cross when there is, a war. Yes, or any, difficult situation. But otherwise, from what I've seen, yeah, you could see people crossing the border all day and, all day and night.
We talked a lot about conflict as one of the main causes of people being forced to flee from several African countries, but I want to ask you also about the climate change and what is happening in this regard and how this impacts people to live. You recently reported from Chad, so if we take the example of Lake Chad and the fact that it shrank so much in the last years, and it is the main water reservoir for the region, how this impacted the local community, people who potentially had to flee or people who came to Chad and now face those scarce resources.
The particularity of African countries is that in terms of climate change, it's a very difficult issue because they're seen as countries that feel the effect of climate change because of pollution elsewhere, water rising elsewhere, and then the consequences are greater on them because of them not having the means to fight them. For Lake Chad, I will compare it to other places where the sole source of water is, a river or a lake. When it shrinks, it takes away also the means of living of those people. Most of the times you will see that they are fishermen, let's say. So where there's less water, you will have less fish. If they have less fish, then they have nothing to eat and then to take to the market and sell. And then they'll just go away. But I'm not a specialist of that area, the Lake Chad, I have to admit. But for places, let's say, where there are floods, for example, there have been a lot this year in Western Central Africa. And they have caused displacement because where they live is most of the time not a endurable material. So they will lose shelter. They will also lose what they have harvested for the year. So losing your harvest means you're not going to eat for the whole year, and you're not going to be able to to plant new crops for the year coming. So it's just years and years that are jeopardized like this because of floods. And then, yes, that will force them to flee again, going to neighboring countries, and then, having to weigh on a host community that also has very little to live with.
In one of your articles, you mentioned about the Central African Republic, where people are coming back thanks to the peace and reconciliation agreement. Can you tell us about this agreement, and do you think is it an example that should be followed in other countries?
The Central African Republic has faced, many conflicts and inter-community conflicts. Most of the times, they're very, people will just summarize them saying, yeah, it's the Christians against the Muslims. It's, herders against farmers. But sometimes it's a bit deeper than that. In terms of agreement, yeah, at some point people have to make peace, But, you'll find people that were neighbors, that killed each other, let's say. So how do you make peace with that? Mm-hmm. You will see husband and wives, just having, different opinions and not, ending in their relationship in a very ugly manner. You would have, because of a crisis, because you are from a targeted group, your neighbors or your community grouping against you, taking your wealth. If you have a business, they will take it, or because you fled, they will come and live in your house, and you're back and you want your house back, and it's another problem. So you find problems like this. When the country is lucky enough for the different parties in a conflict to come together and find an agreement, yes, I think reconciliation is a big word because it takes time. But when it happens, yeah, it allows people to come back. And then that's also whole other process to convince them that, that the areas that they have left are now deemed safe. So when they are convinced, they come back, but then they also need support, financial support mainly, to come back and be able to build their life again.
I have to read a little bit from my big notes, but because this shows the complexity of the situation in the region. So Chad, for example, being a country of origin, also hosts refugees from Sudan, Central African Republic, Cameroon, and Nigeria. Sudan, being a country of origin, also hosts people from South Sudan, Eritrea, Ethiopia. Ethiopia, being a country of origin, hosts people from South Sudan, Somalia, Eritrea, Sudan. Democratic Republic of the Congo, country of origin, at the same time hosts refugees from Rwanda, Burundi, Central African Republic, South Sudan, and I can continue like this. Mm-hmm. So the big issue here is, because this has been happening now for decades, are there any good practices that can bring more stability to the region? They seem to be so interconnected that it seems like, yeah, this, the butterfly that just flies in one part of Africa and just brings some kind of an impact in another one. Anything that actually is positive that can be brought as an example of solving some of the issues?
Wow, that's a big question. Because all those countries you've mentioned have gone through armed conflict. Some have been through genocides. And some are at war at the moment. But then good practice, I think that's what you're asking for, good practice to share. Oh.
Please find something, anything.
I think we actually, no, I'm not sure I will find a good answer to this question, but, choose for African countries just to have, leaders that will protect their resources and redistribute them, in a equal manner, create opportunities for young people, for them not to join armed groups, for example. Also, I think a lot leaning on women. That's, I think, something we don't do much, leaning on women, because I think they are great messengers for peace.
I think Rwanda is
and
one
also-
of the great examples, right? Leaning on women after the genocide when they had to step up, and they have the largest number of female in positions of power, especially parliament.
Wow.
Exactly.
You would never
I
guess
think,
it, right?
yeah. I think, yes, bringing them in public spaces, because I think unfortunately or fortunately, in conflicts, the greater amount of survivors are women. So I think it's a force, our leaders have to lean on, to build a country again. They're the mothers. They'll bring children into this world, and they're the ones that, pass on history, stories, messages. And I think when they are well sensitized, they will raise potential, great leaders for the future. Yeah. I think the question is so broad. I can't think of a right answer right now, but I think there are countries that have shown that it's possible. I would mention Rwanda, for example. The country went through a genocide, and communities were just shattered. But then they came up with an idea of local tribunals, actually, because even the justice system was down. Yeah, so you would be tried by your own neighbors, and then it was kind of cathartic because people were able to point out someone and say, you did this to me. And it held people accountable. And then they were tried, they went to jail, but then there were also mechanisms to allow them to, if not forgive, at least, try and work together to live together, because they had no choice but to live together again.
Thank you very much for your time and your insights. We hope we will be able to continue this discussion. Maybe we'll focus on certain countries next time so we can get even more of your insight.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure participating in this program with you. I'm only discovering initiatives like the ones you have, and I think it's great. I think people like you give voice to refugees. I've met many, and I think they have changed my life just by letting me tell their stories. And I think there are stories that need to be heard. And I wish you well. I wish you a long life. Not so long, because it will mean we will still have refugees, and I wouldn't want that. But all the best to you, and thank you so much for having me.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much to everybody who listened and watched to us. As always, we will be back in 2 weeks' time, and we have to say thank you to Choose Love, to Aperture, and to Veer Foundation and Allianz Foundation. We are very happy that we can lean on those pillars to produce this podcast. And if you would like to sponsor this podcast, you will find a link in the show notes. You can do it on Patreon or just donate through Refocus Media Labs. Thank you so much. Hi guys, this is Sonia, and as many of you know, for the last 7, almost 8 years, Refocus has been my passion project that I have been making happen together with my husband Doug. And over those several years, we managed to graduate hundreds of refugees and asylum seekers with media skills certificates. And we are so proud that so many of them are pursuing their careers right now or go to higher education and are able to really make their dreams come true, contribute to the economies of the countries they decided to settle, and that they have lives, they deserve, they dreamt about, or they are on the path to do so. And yes, this is a donation appeal, because projects like this do not just happen. They need funds. And this is my personal appeal to you. If you can afford this, please consider donating to Refocus. We're really doing really good job with the money we're getting. Our main goal in hiring policy is to hire from the community, from refugee community. So most of the staff is actually are actually people who are refugees, asylum seekers, who have wonderful skills by now, either because they got them in their home countries or they got it with Refocus. So if you feel like this mission aligns with your values, if you care about refugee causes and you can, please donate. If you cannot, please consider organizing a screening, talking to people, your friends, your family about this project, because it is really awesome and it just needs a little bit of support. Thank you.